Hello, Easton Science and Social Studies and Math and PE and Lifetime Fitness. Welcome to the Hot Zone. Oh, one moment. Sorry about that. Just came out of level 4. So I have been volunteered by Mrs. Van Loan to read chapters 4, 5, and 6. This is my second take because technology evades me, but I'm still working it because I refuse to give up. Plus, I might get a smile out of you guys as we read this. Hot Zone by Richard Preston, Chapter 4, A Woman and a Soldier. 1983, September 25th, 1800 hours. Thurmont, Maryland, nearly 4 years after the death of Charles Monet. Evening. A typical American town on Catoctin Mountain, a ridge of the Appalachians that runs north to south through the western part of the state. The trees were brightening into soft yellow and golds. Teenagers drove their pickup trucks slowly across the streets of the town, looking for something to happen, wishing that summer had not ended. Faint smells of autumn touched the air, and the scent of ripening apples, a sourness of dead leaves, corn stalks drying in the fields. In the apple groves at the end of town, flocks of grackles settled into the branches for the night, squawking. Headlights streamed north of the Gettysburg Road. In the kitchen of a Victorian house near the center of town, Major Nancy Jacks, a veterinarian in the United States Army, stood at a counter making dinner for her children. She slid a plate into the microwave oven and pushed a button. Time to nuke up some chicken for the kids. Nancy Jacks wore sweatpants and a t-shirt, and she was barefoot. Her feet had calluses on them, the result of martial arts training. She had wavy auburn hair, which was cut above the shoulders, and greenish eyes. Her eyes were actually two colors, green with an inner rim around the iris that was amber. She was a former homecoming queen for Kansas, Miss Agriculture, Kansas State. She had a slender, athletic build, and she displayed quick motions, flickery gestures with her arms and hands. Ooh, does that remind you of anybody? Her children were restless and tired, and she worked as fast as she could to fix dinner. Jamie, who was 5, hung on Nancy's leg. She grabbed the leg of Nancy's sweatpants and pulled, and Nancy lurched sideways, and then Jamie pulled the other way, and Nancy lurched to the other side. Jamie was short for her age and had greenish eyes like her mother. Nancy's son, Jason, who was 7, was watching television in the living room. He was rail thin and quiet, and when he grew up, he would probably be tall like his father. Nancy's husband, Major Gerald Jacks, who everyone called Jerry, was also a veterinarian. He was in Texas at a training class, and Nancy was alone with the children. Jerry had telephoned to say that it was hot as hell in Texas, and he missed her badly and wished he was home. She missed him too. They had not been apart for more than a few days at a time ever since they had first started dating in college. Nancy and Jerry Jacks, the name is pronounced Jacks, were both members of the Army Veterinary Corps, a tiny corps of doggy doctors. They take care of the Army's guard dogs, as well as Army horses, Army cows, Army sheep, Army pigs, Army mules, Army rabbits, Army mice, and Army monkeys. They also inspect the Army's food. Nancy and Jerry had bought the Victorian house not long after they had been signed to Fort Detrick, which was nearby within easy commuting distance. The kitchen was very small, and at the moment you could see plumbing and wires hanging out of the walls. Not far from the kitchen, the living room had a big bay window with a collection of tropical plants and ferns in it. And there was a cage among the plants that held an Amazon parrot named Herky. The parrot burst into song. Hi ho, it's home from work we go. Mom, Mom, he cried excitedly. His voice sounded like Jason's. What? Nancy Jack said. Then she realized it was the parrot. Nerd brain, she muttered. The parrot wanted to sit on Nancy's shoulder. Mom, Mom, Jerry, Jamie, Jason, the parrot shouted, calling everyone in the family. When he didn't get any response, he whistled the Colonel Bogey March from Bridge on the River Kwai, and then, what, Mom, Mom. Nancy did not want to take Herky out of his cage. She worked quickly, putting plates and silverware on the counter. Some of the officers at Fort Detrick had noticed a certain abrupt quality in her hand motions and accused her of having hands that were too quick to handle delicate work in dangerous situations. Nancy began martial arts training partially because she hoped to make her gestures cool and smooth and powerful, and also because she felt that the frustrations of a woman officer trying to advance her career in the Army. She was 5'4" tall. She liked to spar with 6-foot male soldiers, big guys. She enjoyed knocking them around a little bit. It gave her a certain satisfaction to be able to kick higher than the guy's head. She used her feet more than her hands when she sparred with her opponent because her hands were more delicate. She could break 4 boards with a spinning back kick. She had reached the point where she could kill a man with her bare feet, an idea that did not in itself give her much satisfaction. On occasion, she had come home from her class with a broken toe, a bloody nose, or a black eye. Jerry would just shake his head, Nancy with another shiner. Major Nancy Jacks did all of the housework. She could not stand housework. Scrubbing grape jelly out of rugs did not give her a feeling of reward, and in any case, she did not have time for it. Occasionally, she would go into the paroxysm of cleaning, and she would race around the house for an hour throwing things in closets. Oh, your teacher knows that feeling. Oh, sorry, back to the story. She also did all the cooking for the family. Jerry was useless in the kitchen. Another point of contention was his tendency to buy things impulsively. A motorcycle, a sailboat. Jerry had bought a sailboat when they were stationed at Fort Riley in Kansas. And then there was that god-awful diesel Cadillac with a red leather interior. She and Jerry had commuted to work together in it, but the car had started to lay smoke all over the road, even before the payments were finished. One day, she finally said to Jerry, "You can sit in the driveway in those red leather seats all you want, but I'm not getting in there with you." So they sold the Cadillac and bought a Honda Accord. The Jackses' house was the largest Victorian house in town, a pile of turreted brick with slate roof and tall windows and a cupola and wooden paneling made of golden armor American chestnut. It stood on a street corner near the ambulance station. The sirens woke them up at night. They had bought that house cheap. It had sat on the market a long time, and a story had been going around that the previous owner had hanged himself in the basement. After the Jackses bought it, the dead man's widow showed up at the door one day. She was a wizened old lady, came to have a look around the place, and she fixed a blue eye on Nancy and said, "Little girl, you are going to hate the house. I did." There were other animals in the house besides the parrot. In a wire cage in the living room lived a python named Samson. He would occasionally escape from his cage, wander around the house, and eventually climb up inside the hollow center of the dining room table and go to sleep. There he would stay for a few days. It gave Nancy a creepy feeling to think there was a python asleep in the dining room table. Yeah. You wondered whether the snake was going to wake up while you were eating dinner. Nancy had a study in the cupola at the top of the house. The snake had once escaped from his cage and disappeared for a few days. They pounded and knocked on the dining room table to try and flush him out, but he wasn't there. Late one night, when Nancy was in her study, the snake oozed out of the rafters and hung in front of her face, staring at her with lidless eyes. And she screamed. Yeah, I would too. The family also had an Irish setter and an Airedale Terrier. Whenever the Jackses were assigned to a different Army post, the animals moved with them in boxes and cages, a portable ecosystem of the Jacks family. Nancy loved Jerry. He was tall and fine-looking, a handsome man with prematurely gray hair. She thought of his hair as silver to go along with his silver tongue, which he used trying to talked her into buying diesel Cadillacs with red leather interiors. He had sharp brown eyes and sharp nose like a hawk's, and he understood her better than anyone else on earth. Nancy and Jerry Jacks had very little social life outside of their marriage. They had grown up on farms in Kansas, 20 miles apart as the crow flies, but had not known each other as children. They met in veterinary school at Kansas State University and had gotten engaged a few weeks later, and they were married when Nancy was 20. By the time they graduated, they were broke, in debt, and had no money to set up as a practice as veterinarians, and so they enlisted in the Army together. Since Nancy didn't have time to cook during the week, she would spend her Saturdays cooking. She would make up beef stew in a crock pot, or she would broil several chickens. Then she would freeze the food in bags. On weekday nights, she would take a bag out of the freezer and heat it in the microwave. Tonight, while she thawed chicken, she considered the question of vegetables. How about canned green beans. The children liked that. Nancy opened a cabinet and pulled down a can of Libby's beans. She searched through one of her two drawers and looked for a can opener. Couldn't find it. She turned into and looked into the main junk drawer, which held all of the utensils, the stirring spoons and vegetable peelers. It was a jam-packed nightmare. The hell with the can opener. She pulled a butcher knife out of the drawer. Her father had always warned her not to use a knife to open a can, but Nancy Jacks had never made a point of listening to her father's advice. Uh-oh. She jabbed the butcher knife into the can, and the point stuck in the metal. She hit the handle with the heel of her right hand. All of a sudden, her hand slipped down the handle, struck the tang of the blade, and slid down the blade. She felt the edge bite deep. The butcher knife clattered to the floor, and big drops of blood fell on the counter. "Son of a," she said. The knife had sliced through the middle of her hand on the palm. It was a deep cut. She wondered if the knife had hit bone or cut any tendons. She put pressure on the cut to staunch the bleeding and went over to the sink, turned on the faucet, thrust her hand under the stream of water. The sink turned red. She wiggled her fingers. They worked. So she had not cut or sliced a tendon. This was not such a bad cut. Holding her hand over her head, she went into the bathroom and found a Band-Aid. She waited for the blood to coagulate and then pressed the Band-Aid over the cut, drawing the sides of the cut together to seal the wound. She hated the sight of blood, even if it was her own blood. She had a thing about blood. She knew what blood could contain. Nancy skipped the children's baths because of the cut on her hand and gave them their usual snuggle in bed. That night, Jamie slept in bed with her. Nancy didn't mind, especially because Jerry was out of town, and it made her feel close to her children. Jamie seemed to need the reassurance. Jamie was always a little edgy when Jerry was out of town. That, ladies and gentlemen, is chapter 4. There's a who, what, where, why, when all over in there. Check right at the beginning if you missed the who and the when and the where. Chapter 5 coming up soon.